All right, welcome back, everybody, to another weekly wrap-up across the SNG universe. I'm Greg Otto, and I'm here with Billy Mitchell and Jake Williams. Another busy week across our audience. Billy, let's just jump right into it. I know there's been some just incredible news going on the FedScoop side of things, so I'll let you dive right in.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on. There's a lot going on with the pandemic, but I think the story I'm going to pick to talk about, just because it's such a hot topic and it's fresh off the press. Last night, Amazon filed a second protest in the JEDI debacle, which is I don't know that I've heard of that happening in a long time, where a single company has two protests going on at the same time. This has to do with, obviously, they filed one protest after they lost. And the latest is that that Court of Federal Claims in which they filed the protest, the judge let DOD take the solicitation back to the start and do some corrective action with it. And Amazon is not happy with that. They say there's a lot of ambiguity, so they are protesting that quote unquote corrective action. So two protests going on at once, and a lot of food flinging, if you will. There's a big food fight going on between Microsoft and Amazon. Both have blogs calling each other, not so nice things, and it's just becoming, this whole big political battle. It's great to watch, but also terrible for the DoD.
Yeah, how does this shake out? Do you see this? Does one protest, if it goes to one side, automatically negate the second protest? How does that work? It seems like this is going to be caught up in red tape for years to come.
Yeah, it is going to be caught up in red tape for years. And I think this second one isn't necessarily, it's more of a dependent type protest. It's obviously, we don't know too much about it right now because it's filed directly with DOD. So it's behind the department lines, so it's not made public. So we don't know exactly what's going on there. But it's not a full-on protest in a sense that, their initial protest was of the whole thing. This is only into the corrective action. So I think this one's going to be taken care of first. But yeah, I think the red tape, regardless, this thing isn't going to be settled. Amazon, if it doesn't get its way, either in this protest or the actual fuller one, is just going to ask the court to, move it up to an appeals court or something like that. They're not going to be happy. This thing's going to stretch on. I don't think we're going to see anything happen in 2020 with this. I would be highly surprised, even if DoD comes out with some corrective action. If they were to push it in Amazon's favor, obviously Microsoft isn't going to be happy. They're going to continue to, fling mud at one another. So I don't know where this thing's going to go. It's fun to watch, but again, these are critical technologies that DoD needs. And, 3 years later, after they came out with the original solicitation, they still don't have it. So, it's a mess, and that's all I can really say about it. But again, it's fun to watch.
Yeah, it sounds like a Gordian knot of epic proportions. And myself, I have my own Gordian knot on the DoD level to talk about. But before I get there, Jake, what's going on the state scoop side of things?
Yeah, it's interesting. It sort of follows the same sort of tone of what Billy was talking about, albeit a little bit less severe. So we had some big news on the smart city front this week. So Sidewalk Labs, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which you probably know as Google's parent company, they announced that they're going to pull out of a big project in Toronto that was focused on building a smart neighborhood. So an entire neighborhood from the ground up filled with smart technology. This is pretty huge news because it's been in the works for about 2.5 years. And the company has invested a ton of money into making this neighborhood a reality in Toronto. So originally, it all stemmed from an announcement that I actually covered many years ago at a Smart Cities conference from Sidewalk Labs CEO Dan Doctoroff, who's a former deputy mayor of New York City. And basically, the whole tagline was that Google wants to build a city from the ground up. So they settled a couple of years ago on this neighborhood Quayside in Toronto, which is right along the city's waterfront, if you've ever been to Toronto. And it was supposed to be that testing ground for smart city technology. But the company announced yesterday, which was the Thursday, that they're going to pull out of the project in anticipation of the economic challenges from the coronavirus pandemic. So this announcement really plays into what is surely going to be an evolving trend for us going forward, how the economic fallout from the pandemic is going to impact emerging technology and smart city initiatives in cities and in states and in counties going forward. The basic economic principle is when you have good economic times, you can invest upfront in technologies that might save you some money in the long run, like automation, data analysis, things like that. But those conversations and those conversations and the investments of capital upfront, they're much harder when budgets are tight. So if things are going to be tighter after this pandemic, it's going to be something that the vendor community and government organizations alike are really going to have to reckon with in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the big things there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the city and its residents weren't too keen on this project overall, because I feel like if the city would have wanted it, we wouldn't be here.
There was certainly some controversy. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there was like widespread disarray or upset feelings about it. It just, like any big government project, it was taking some time. So there were some concerns about data privacy, right? Naturally, a big part of smart cities technology is surveillance, is data collection. It's understanding what's happening in the city around you and building a more responsive city to that. So some Toronto residents were concerned and spoke out against Waterfront Toronto, which is the board in Toronto that was making this project happen with Google, or with Sidewalk Labs, again, subsidiary of Alphabet. But they mostly resolved most of those protests, and Alphabet was working. It seemed in recent months to be a bit more forthcoming about what data was going to be collected, how it was going to be used, and how it would impact citizen privacy. So, it was far from an easy road, and I'm sure that I'm sure that those concerns played a role in the decision to cancel the project, but. This does seem to be driven, at least in the announcement that they delivered, that seems to be delivered primarily for economic reasons.
And do you think this is going to be a microcosm for smart cities on a larger scale, that, this Google pulling out of this kind of signals a bad thing for this industry, that, the economic downturn is going to be something that permeates the development of smart cities in other cities?
It might be. I mean, it could be. I think what you're probably going to see is just like it has over the last couple of decades, the definition of what a smart city is going to continue to change. So I think that we were starting to get, as economic times were doing well, we were starting to get to this point where we were actually able to start envisioning a smart city that really was built from the ground up. One like a Sidewalk Labs development. But I think now, as budgets are going to tighten both on the private sector side, but also on the government side, it's going to be a lot harder to pull those things together and do these sweeping giant projects. So I think it's going to look different. I don't think smart city technology is going anywhere. I do think that government, as we know from covering this stuff for the last couple of years, government is responsive to the ways that that citizens are engaging with technology. They're a little slower to adopt, but as our technology needs change as citizens, so are the way that we're going to interact with our government. But the difference is that this is certainly going to, I think, slow the speed of these wide scale adoptions that we saw that we were going to maybe see in a place like Toronto. And it's going to happen more at the speed of a place like, say, New York, where you slowly have these small projects that roll out, and all together they comprise a smart city vision, but it starts much smaller.
Gotcha. Greg, tell us about your Gordian knot at the DoD.
Yeah, so another DoD Gordian knot, except on the micro level. So last month, there was a small agency inside the DoD, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. They're the agency that is now responsible for background checks. They took over for OPM after the OPM breach. But last month, they put out a cybersecurity bulletin that said Chinese hackers were going after cleared contractors, taking data and moving it through a leaking sinkhole. The leaking sinkhole part is the crux of the story that we concentrated on this week. Guys, in the internet, sinkholes don't leak. Like, that's not the way that this works. Sinkholes are established to take in bad traffic that's tied to botnets and just dump it into a hole where it just dies. It doesn't actually connect to any computers, and a botnet doesn't work. It's not like an actual sinkhole in the world where if water is moving through it and there's a hole on the side, it can go somewhere else. Like, that's not the way data moves. So Arshan and Vavra reached out to a bunch of experts about this, including the people that own the sinkhole that was talked about in the report. Nobody knows what they're talking about. Nobody has any idea what is going on. The people behind the sinkhole, this company called Anubis, which is owned by a parent company in Boston, we talked to them and they said, we don't know what's in this report, or we know what's in this report. We don't know what's going on. We haven't seen anything that's detailed here, and we don't have any way to fix it because there's no technical information to say, hey, this is what you should do. And we talked to some other independent experts that were like, that's not the way internet traffic moves. So we said, okay, let's say, for instance, that what is going on is actually happening, but it's not a quote unquote leaking sinkhole. What has happened here? And it looks like it could have been that the sinkhole company bought some IP addresses that were abandoned infrastructure from a Chinese hacking group and then turned it around and put it in their sinkhole to get botnet traffic and make sure that it's not evil traffic anymore. It could have been that, you know, there was just a lot of IPs changing across the board, across the entire internet, that all of a sudden traffic gets redirected. But nobody knows, based on the way that the DCSA described it, that that is what's happening. And on top of everything else, the report attributes the hacking to a group called Electric Panda, which is a small Chinese hacking group that cybersecurity community doesn't know a lot about. That name has only been attributed to one group back in 2013. And prior to this alert, there really hasn't been any public-facing reports or knowledge that this group is out there going after a bunch of different stuff. Now, the contractors that were targeted do all different types of stuff: cybersecurity, maritime, healthcare. And this was initially reported as part of, you know, COVID Hacker Watch, that, oh, there's this group going after healthcare contractors. And it turned out, well, no, this contractor data ran the gamut across critical infrastructure sectors. But nobody has an explanation for what is actually going on. They put out the release. The DCSA wouldn't comment to us after. We were like, there are some people that have some questions here. And furthermore, the DCSA doesn't do a lot of cybersecurity stuff, so we reached out to some agencies that do cybersecurity: NSA, DHS, FBI, and everybody was like, either we're not commenting or we don't have any idea what's going on here. So it's a mystery. There's a huge mystery as to what a leaking sinkhole could be, whether contractors were hacked, and whether it was this Chinese group that nobody's ever heard of except for one mention in a report in 2013. So that was this week's mystery.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who has no clue what that means, but that's really interesting. What's the next steps on that? Are you guys following up on that and continue to look into it?
I mean, we're going to try to, but it's funny that you say that. BitSite, the company that owns the sinkhole, before we published the story, we reached back out to them one last time to be like, has anybody from the government picked up the phone? And they were like, no. We don't have any idea what's going on. We've been trying to get in contact with people to figure out what it is here, because obviously, if by some leap of internet physics, this is exactly what's going on, and there is hacked data moving through a sinkhole back to China or whatever infrastructure, we would like to know that and figure that out. And there's been nothing. So the story's been really popular for us, and everybody's kind of scratching their heads and saying, okay, well, what really happened here? Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get an answer, but it goes to show that technical writing is hard. I mean, this stuff is complicated.
Great. Well, 2020, we have COVID, murder hornets, and now leaking sinkholes. So
yeah, what comes next? You can only imagine what's going to come next week too. So good talking to you guys. Nice to see that the stories are just bouncing all over the place, from JEDI contracts to upset smart cities to leaking sinkholes. What a week.
What a week. Have a good one, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.